Hello, everybody on the webinar today. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about HR. Is recruiting HR too? Sorry, we could skip that one over. The answer to that really is, it all depends who you ask. When I first started out in recruiting years ago, I remember the director of HR at my first company telling me, recruiting isn't really a real job. It's where you go when you are trying to earn your way into HR. And I remember that always stuck with me, as it was such a separated mentality about what the role of recruiting and the impact recruiting was going to have on HR. Through the last decade and a half of my career, I've seen that role of HR really evolve. And part of that is because work has just changed. Today, we have multiple generations in the workforce. 4, some say 5 different generations are in the workforce, which is really forcing us to rethink our organizations, structures, models, how we do things. Those roles, and as well as the people, are changing within the organization. So some jobs have been eliminated because they don't meet the needs of where technology and where things are going today, while entirely new jobs that didn't even exist a decade ago are being hired at a lot of organizations. Where we are working is also changed. We are global. It's virtual. People are working from home or hotel rooms or coffee shops more and more. And it is becoming far more common for people to never even report into their main office. And when we work is changing. Flex hours, shared jobs, and work-life balance overall really means a greater emphasis is being placed on maximizing performance and what people are doing versus just that face time that we cared a lot more about in previous decades. And finally, how people are working has changed. We have the mobility, the where, the what, the who, just overall, it's just very different. And the future of the workforce is fundamentally different. And so when we talk about the future workforce and who we're trying to reach out to and who we're trying to connect, I think we get a little bit too hung up on the word millennial and what that means. And I always try to remind people that the generation that we refer to as millennials at the turn into the 2000s, they're all in their late 30s now, up 38, 39, and they are no longer the recent college grads. Yet we still kind of talk about that generation. When we talk about the future of work, what we really should be talking about is just how things are different because of who's in the workplace. We do have much more technology native people. We do have much more of a globalized reach around our organizations. And we also have an expectation of information. And a lot of these things are not specific to the millennials or the recent grads. Look around and see who is using cell phones when you are out at dinners or standing in line at the airport or anywhere else. It isn't just 20-somethings. The fastest growing users of mobile and social and all of these other aspects of apps that we use are actually people over 55. And so the future of the workforce, it's far less about the age of the people and way more about the adoption of the technology. And a big key that we're seeing that is changing the scope of all of this is the feedback impact. Because we have this technology at the touch of our fingers, we've really started to care a lot more about what is going on around us, what everybody else thinks about what is going on around us, and want to not only make sure everybody else knows our opinions on things, but we want to know their opinions as well. So think back to the last couple weeks. How many times did you use Yelp or OpenTable or TripAdvisor or even just look at reviews? We're in the middle of looking at new appliances in our kitchen. So what do? You look at the reviews. What do other people have to say? How have they liked it? It is no different when we start talking about looking at jobs and how all of this connects. Glassdoor, while it is not the only feedback site, it probably is the most popular and the most commonly known. Currently, there are more than 30 million users on Glassdoor, more than 10 million reviews on 540,000 companies across 190 countries. one of the really interesting things that I have found on Glassdoor is it isn't just companies in big cities. It's companies in very rural areas. It's small companies. It's large companies. It's companies right in the middle. It's new companies and old companies. You've got a huge mix of organizations out there because more and more our employees and the people that we're trying to hire to be our employees want to share information and they want to know what's going on. Part of this is simply because how we look for jobs has changed. When you kind of go back in time to the late 90s, even early 2000s, looking for jobs was pretty simple. You checked the Sunday ads in the newspaper to see what openings there were. You looked on Monster or maybe Career Builder, depending on where you lived. And then you just asked around. You looked for help wanted signs in windows. You went door to door if you were in high school through the mall to apply to all of the different places using paper and a pen. Now, it's a lot more complicated when we see people trying to look for jobs. When somebody decides to consider looking for a new role, there's a lot of stuff that takes place before they even click apply. First, they start asking around for options. They say, hey, where do you work at? How do you like it? I know, for example, working in HR and in this industry, people always ask, hey, what's it like to work at this company? Or, did you ever work with them? What's your input on them? Second, you then have to filter through their own opinions and perceptions. So what do you already think you know about what it's like to work somewhere? Just based on things you might have heard in the past or just your feeling, whether it was, this is especially challenging for consumer selling companies and consumer-facing companies because their business and consumer experience with that organization is going to reflect on what they think it's like to actually work there. Then maybe they'll check out a few career sites. There's so many different sites out there now that we're seeing a little bit more aggregation, and we're seeing people start going the other way, LinkedIn and Indeed and some other places around like that. Finally, they start reading job descriptions and postings. When we do research of candidates, it's really interesting to see how much of a decision to apply or not to apply actually comes down to that job description and the posting and what is actually presented out there and how well they feel they're going to fit within your culture simply based off that one document and that one page. Finally, they're going to check out Glassdoor all before they even click apply. What most people don't realize is you do lose a number of people. You do have candidate drop-off after the apply point, but you're going to lose a huge amount of your candidates before you even get to the point where they're going to click on apply to apply to that job. I wonder how many people on this call remember when HR and recruiting specifically was still called the personnel department. And we've really had this shift from personnel to talent acquisition teams. And again, just in the last 15 to 20 years, you've seen a massive shift as to how departments and people have really evolved in these type of roles. Part of that is because the goals within talent acquisition have changed. It was at one point simply about we have an opening, post or make sure the job is in the newspaper on Sunday, wait for resumes to come in, review the resumes, hand them off to a hiring manager, let them hire somebody, and then we move forward with the next process. It was very reactive in how we did this for the most part. Today, the goals for talent acquisition departments have really evolved and changed into 4 kind of functions. So we have sourcing and recruiting, employment branding, and candidate experience, which really kind of encompasses the overall process. At a very high level, its goals are to develop an employment brand, make it really easy to apply, be proactive at identifying needs, availability, and creating talent pipelines or pipelines of talent, To adopt consumer-style strategies for marketing and engagement, talent shortages for good candidates never go away. I think I just want to highlight that really fast because I think there's sometimes a misconception, especially outside of recruiting. In recruiting, we get it. We know how hard our job is. We understand what a challenge it is to find a good employee at any time. What I think a lot of times our business partners, whether they are our hiring managers or just other business leaders within the organization, one of the struggles of a disconnect that they have is understanding that when unemployment is high, it's almost as challenging to find really good people because passive candidates are a little bit less likely to feel comfortable making a move. And when it's really low, it's also the same type of situation. So there's a very small little sweet spot in there to make it not quite as challenging. And finally, looking at positions and candidates for skill sets versus titles. As titles have changed dramatically, how we assess and how we look at resumes has really had to evolve and change also. At one point, you might have somebody that was called a receptionist. And if you need to hire a new receptionist, you would look for other people that have the title of receptionist. Well, now you might be looking for a chief happiness officer or a front door greeter or a whole host of other titles that I have seen for very similar roles. And the department structures themselves have really changed. And so in a lot of organizations, and if you're a smaller company, you probably have people that are doing multiple hats here. Larger organizations are setting up different roles within the recruiting department versus just having a recruiter and a recruiting manager. You might have an employment branding expert. These people often sit and kind of live in a world that are halfway between marketing and recruiting, and they really make sure that the employment brand and the corporate brand are aligned and both reaching the right type of candidates. You'll have a sourcing team, and your sourcing team are the ones that find the candidates and fill the future talent pools. And this is a group of people that work really closely with other aspects to know what's coming up. And so where they fit in the broader scope of HR is to really make sure that what is coming down the pipeline, whether it is from retirement or if it is going to be replacements or even just growth and changes to the organization, they're there to really help support and make sure that the right people are ready to apply and get in place when those roles open. You then have recruiting coordinators. They are the ones that really keep everything moving and keep everything running, organized. Your interviews are on schedule. Your candidates are reached back out to. Everything moves a lot smoother thanks to recruiting coordinators. Then you have recruiters, which are doing the screening, interviewing, and managing of the requisitions and are typically the ones partnering really closely, whether it's with an HR business partner or also with the hiring manager themselves or a combination of that. And finally, you have your onboarding person or team that makes sure that those candidates, once they get that offer set, all the way through that first 90 days are really welcomed, and their involvement on a broader scale is really looking at engagement and partnering with learning and the engagement teams and the talent management teams and really making sure those next steps are going to be taken effectively. Beyond that, you're likely going to have somebody that is focusing on recruitment analytics, diversity specialists, campus recruiting teams, and a whole host of other types of roles. When we could see easily that the recruiting departments have changed. I think one other thing we need to look at are the professionals themselves have changed. Early in my career, as I already mentioned, the role of recruiting and people that were in that were typically more junior level. They were there as a stepstone to get to another area of HR, whether that was to become a generalist or become a specialist in benefits and employee wellness or payroll or one of the other areas. Today, recruiting professionals are coming in with recruiting being their track, talent acquisition, talent management really being the career track. not simply a stepping stone. And a lot of times, talent acquisition professionals today are not always going to be HR professionals. They're following and looking at consumer marketing trends at a lot of organizations as closely as they are following HR trends. Many of them are coming into roles that are much more development and business focused than recruiting roles in the past. And an interesting fact that we're starting to see is that talent acquisition professionals are as likely to work in sales or marketing as they are in HR for their next moves. And so as we talk about kind of the career lattices that millennials and even people in their 30s and 40s now are starting to follow versus the latter, we're seeing them move in and out of talent acquisition and into sales roles and marketing roles as frequently as they are moving into additional HR roles. So why has there been a gap when it's so easy to see so much overlap as to how the new talent acquisition departments are set up and the new roles that are in those departments? Why are we still seeing a gap about, its involvement and its true inclusion in the HR function? Well, part of it is because we really have not gone through and spent a lot of time looking at strategy. More than half of HR departments have not adjusted their recruiting strategy or approach in the last 3 to 5 years at all. It's a really scary statistic for me as an advisor and a professional in this space, because I've seen how much not only the technology has evolved and changed, but I've seen what the expectations of the candidates have done and how that has evolved and changed as well. There's a different level of expectations that are coming through. If you haven't started to do this, this is from Brennan. Brennan and Associates now is part of Deloitte. And you'll see this talent acquisition maturity model is something that they post out and they put out. Level 1 is really what we would consider a little bit older model or a more traditional style of recruiting. It definitely is very reactive. It's much more tactical in its approach. It is more, tell me what role needs to get filled. I'll hand you over some resumes, but I'm not really involved in this other than doing a really basic screen and then passing it off. Level 2 is more of a standardized operational recruiting, where this is for companies that are starting to move in the right direction, where it really is they're starting to look at and standardizing technology throughout the company. And they're starting to establish strong relationships. They're partners with hiring managers to much more of a degree when they were previously. And they're really starting to be a little bit more strategic when assessing the candidates. If 100 resumes come in a traditional reactive or tactical recruiting way, maybe 90 or 80 are going to get to a hiring manager. When you're in the operational recruiting or kind of level 2, maybe only 50 get to a hiring manager. You are a little bit more empowered to be more strategic at moving this forward. Level 3 is really integrated talent acquisition, and this is much more of a full integration with HR, talent management. You've spent time on your employment brand. You've launched successful social media campaigns. You have active pipelines of candidates coming in, and you have some pretty robust talent acquisition programs. I think most people and most organizations really live somewhere between level 2 and 3 in their companies overall. And then really the optimized or the level 4, the key is a very strategic partner, not just to HR, but to the business. They can predict what is going on and what challenges are going to be made. There is an investment and understanding of the importance of talent acquisition. And the recruiters are agile and really strategic. One of the things I want to challenge you and your organizations to kind of think through and think about this maturity model a little bit differently than how Brennan, asks us to do, is to kind of look at it at some of these key things that we do as an organization. So sourcing, employment branding, core recruiting, and then our strategic involvement. More often than not, I see organizations have 4 dots on 4 different levels or in 4 different places for each of the different, from sourcing, employment branding, recruiting, and strategy. You can be really high in one area and then maybe a little bit more reactive in the other. And so sometimes it helps as we kind of go through the where do you start and some of these other pieces, it kind of helps sometimes to get that framework as a starting point and realize it's okay to work on one of these areas at a time. It's a lot harder to try to do everything all at once and move from level 1 to level 4 in all 4 areas than it is to focus on, let's really take a look at our employment branding, or let's look at sourcing, or let's look at whatever area is really impacting us. So with that, where do you actually start? The first area to start in is really at Unified Talent Management. And it is making sure that your recruiting and your HR teams are connected. And obviously, it's great if your technology is doing this and you have one piece of technology, but at a minimum, you need to make sure that your strategies and your leadership are approaching all of the different aspects of HR from a much more unified approach. Second, it's asking and really looking, is your talent acquisition strategy aligned not just to the rest of your business and not from a unified talent management perspective, but how are you aligned to market demands? I think one of the really interesting challenges and opportunities a lot of organizations face is trying to make sure that how they present themselves as they start looking at their strategy and trying to be a better partner with the business leaders and with HR is how do we present this in a way that is aligned to what the market expectations are. Because it's one thing to do a really great job and present it out and wrap it up in a pretty bow and here's our wonderful new website. But if you're not talking the right language of what our candidates in your specific market are demanding, it's going to be a lot more challenging. And each organization is going to have to take a look at what their market demands are. If you are in Southern California, it's going to be a lot different than if you're in Omaha, Nebraska. And if you are a high-tech company versus a manufacturing company, the demands might be different. So it's really making sure you're aligned to those. When we look a little bit more generically at the demands of the new workforce, we can see that a lot of this actually ties back in to the other areas of HR that we should be partnering with the number one area being training and development. Time after time, one of the biggest things that are coming out of research on why people are leaving jobs and why they're staying and why they take new jobs and what that hook or that connection is with them, it's the opportunity to be developed. It's the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to grow. And the research is showing that here. Vacation, childcare, cash bonuses, flexible hours. Obviously, in HR, we don't always have control over all of these areas, but what we can do is for any of these that we do offer, we should be partnering and making sure from our employment branding and our career sites and our job postings versus descriptions that are going out there, that we're highlighting these things that we know the market is desiring and asking of us. The next question is your talent acquisition strategy aligned to your overall business strategy? HR often gets involved, and we have CHROs. We've done a really great job of bringing HR into the business strategy side of it. Unfortunately, we don't always have that trickle down to the talent acquisition team. As, again, the role is sometimes still seen in a lot of organizations as a lot more reactive and not understanding kind of the value that it can bring and how it can support 6, 9, 12, 24-month goals that are going on within the organization. So we're going to take a couple of minutes to walk through just some areas of within the business and within HR specifically. The first area is in talent management, and where we can really make sure that talent acquisition is partnering a little bit more closely with recruiting or with HR. In talent management, there's really 5 key areas where we see a really great opportunity for partnerships. The first is in re-recruiting. And re-recruiting, simply stated, is making sure that your current employees feel like they are being wanted, encouraged, recruited, and have opportunities in front of them. Because in a lot of markets right now, they're getting a lot of calls from other headhunters and from other companies and from other groups that are trying to recruit them out. So it's important for recruiting just to touch base, or for somebody on the talent management team to kind of see what is going on to make sure they know where it fits. It really does tie in a little bit to succession planning. For succession planning, the partnership between a succession planning group and the talent acquisition leadership is really key. If you know you have gaps in your succession plan and areas that are coming up that are not going to be covered or are going to need a lot more development than you have skills for currently, it's really important that your talent acquisition department has the foresight into those areas so they can start developing pipelines. And what I mean by developing pipelines is they can put together simply a folder, right? A future wish list type of person. So you can put them into this certain area or a pipeline that they can keep nurturing them in as they see the same type of personality, type, cultural fit, background, experience that we have gaps for in succession planning. We can hold them to the side. Even if they applied for a different role that they weren't a fit for, we can flag them and save them for later. So when that succession planning does come up, we already have a short list of candidates. It's very similar to how headhunters worked for years. And what we're seeing is more and more of these headhunting agency type of recruiting styles coming in-house as we create more of this partnership. Next is on employee engagement. I think we sometimes have a miss on connecting the dots between the hire and the employee engagement. We wait, they come in, they're onboarded, they're in, and then we try to start engaging them. When really great employee engagement programs start way before the person even gets hired, because you want that person to be excited and engaged through the entire hiring process. And so creating that partnership from very early on impacts retention and some of these other areas as we keep moving that employee through the employee life cycle. Finally, rewards and team building, identifying skills gaps on teams as well as worker interest to develop the teams internally, and making sure you have the right type of people being fit on the right type of teams as this moves around. A couple of stats specifically around that pipelining and passive candidates, and why it's so important that from a strategy perspective, the organization is really working with the talent acquisition teams much more strategically on their passive candidate profiling, is passive candidates are 120% more likely to want to make an impact day one at the organization. They're also 33% more likely to want challenging work when they come on board. So next, let's talk a little bit about learning and the impact on learning. As we go through the interview process, it's really easy to see where somebody might have some gaps, like where they have shortcomings over our ideal candidate, where we can use some development, whether that is social development or professional skill development or competency development. Whatever that looks like, we get a lot of opportunity through the interview process to take note, make note, see what that is, and if we are really a unified strategy and a unified front, we then have a way to transfer that information over to our learning team to make sure that person is put on right away a type of development plan or a learning program where they can be getting the right type of content to continue to help them develop not only for themselves, but into the right type of employee that we are looking for. So that might be helping them identify self-directed learning opportunities, obviously mobile training. Same holds true, social collaboration, mentorship programs, as well as personal development. And some organizations that have really started to do this link really tightly, their mentorship programs are set up, and the mentor themselves actually does part of the interviewing process and starts that relationship before the people are even hired. So once they are on board, that relationship can really flourish and continue on. Going back again to the passive candidates and how the development side and the learning side really links back, passive candidates are 17% less likely to need skill development opportunities than candidates that are doing direct application or responding simply to a job posting or an advertisement you have in the market. And finally, the last section I want to look at here is on retention. And really, there's quite a bit of research that is starting to come out around the talent retention and how much of that is impacted by talent acquisition. It's not uncommon when a company is facing high turnover numbers or retention issues that they immediately start looking at more training opportunities and looking at management, and they start looking at all of these compensation and all of these areas, all of which are really key and really important. We've already done that, and you're still facing talent retention challenges, and you're not quite sure what's going on, or you have a particular role that keeps turning over, or you have a particular location or department that keeps turning over. A lot of times that trickles back as we follow it back is that there's something going on in hiring to start with. And whether that is how the role is being presented, whether that is how the interview process is and what we were telling potential candidates about what it's like to work at the company or for a particular manager, all of these things we have found now greatly impact the retention numbers. And so partnering to look at talent retention, and if we are having to fill the same roles over and over, how are we partnering to make sure that we understand why these people keep turning over? When somebody is let go from a role, why were they let go? What do we need to hire differently? How do we want to recruit differently? What a lot of organizations do is they don't funnel that information back down to the recruiters who's actually front line and making a decision to find and replace the talent that was lost. Again, my final stat here on the passive candidates. A big part, we all know, around finding the right fit, in addition to the skills, is to find people that fit into a corporate culture. Passive candidates are 56% more likely to want a corporate culture that fits their personality. And so they typically have a job already. So for them to make a move, it really is about making sure that it not only is the right role, but it's the right people that they are being surrounded with. Beyond HR, there's a lot of impact that recruiting and talent acquisition should be having as well. One of the biggest reasons is because employment brand and corporate brand are linked. It didn't used to be like this. The merge and the way we are with technology and Facebook and social and commercials and advertising and YouTube, everything now comes back to an employment brand and corporate brand being pretty much the same. Go out if you are uncertain about this and Google the 10 best companies to work for and the 10 worst companies to work for. There's lists that show up, and it highlights companies. If you don't think that the worst companies to work for list is going to impact whether people want to do business there or not, start looking and following the market trends about what happens when you're going on. I think we've had a great news example this last couple of weeks with United. I'd be curious to know and see if there is any impact on people wanting to work for that company and say they work for there versus a different airline. There's also a financial cost to having a negative brand, a negative employment brand, and a bad reputation in the marketplace. According to Harvard Business Review, companies with a bad reputation are going to spend on average 10% more per hire. To kind of roll that out, if you have 10,000 employees, That could be as much as $7.6 million a year to make up simply for having a poor employment brand on what you're having to overcompensate people to work at your organization for. From a recruiting perspective and from a budget perspective, strong employment brands also drive 2 times as many qualified applications. And I think a key thing there to point out is that they are qualified applications, not just applications, as well as leads to a 50% decrease in the cost per hire on average. Finally, just some other considerations to keep in mind. We talked through a lot of these different areas as to where recruiting fits and what it looks like now and how that fits into the broader scope of HR. But other considerations to keep in mind, this is another graphic by Brennan that lines up to the one that we looked at earlier, and this looks specifically at turnover rates based on the maturity level of the organizations. And so that first one, that was the really reactive tactical, on average is going to have a 17% turnover rate. As we move up to level 3 and 4, where we are really getting talent acquisition, more integrated, more partnered with talent management, core HR, as well as just business as a whole, we see a huge drop at level 3 and 4 in the turnover rates for organizations. So when you start hearing about challenges within your organization with engagement, retention, turnover, if you have growth coming up and you're going to be needing to make some changes, customer satisfaction scores, there's a whole other conversation we can have around the impact of hiring and customer satisfaction and employee engagement and how all of those are tied together. Plus profitability and consumer brand issues. All of those issues are impacted by who we hire, how we hire, and how well we do or don't partner with other areas of the organization. So is HR and recruiting really tied together? Yes. Recruiting, of course, is HR too, because it's all about the people. It just is coming from a little bit different approach. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Holly in case there are any additional questions that have come in that we can have some discussion about and answer.
All right, great presentation, Sarah. Thank you for sharing that knowledge about the evolution of recruiting and how a new approach can benefit HR and business drivers. We've had a few questions come in, and we can certainly get to those in about 20 minutes, the time we have remaining. And HCI members, if you're on the line, if you have not yet submitted questions for Sarah, go ahead and submit them now in that question and answer box that you can see right there on the webcast page, and we'll be sure to get those answered. So we've got a first question coming in from Mary, and she says, if the HR role in her organization is not transforming itself to align with forward-thinking practices, how do I get the right people on board to make this change?
I think that is a very challenging place to be, right? I get it. It's sometimes hard to come in and be like, we have to change all of this. We have to do it differently. I think one of the best starting points is to really make sure that you do a good assessment or audit of where you are at now. I think anytime we're looking to make any type of sweeping changes or evolutions, that is a great starting point. For recruiting specifically, a really simple, easy place to start is at the very beginning, and that is with your career site, your candidate experience, your employment brand, and really getting an understanding of what that looks like. And a lot of these tips I'll share are not things that cost any money. It's really easy to do. It's something that is free, low cost, simple, and you can just do it yourself in not a lot of time either. And so it's really starting at the beginning. It's going to your corporate website. How easy is it to get to your career page? When you get to your career page, how easy is it to actually locate information about your organization? When you read the information that is out there, could you replace your company name with your number one competition's name? And it's going to be the exact same thing. Are you doing anything different to differentiate who you are and how you are explaining the values and who you are as a business compared to just kind of having a generic site that's out there. Next, is it really easy to find your open roles? Is it easy for people to apply? Can they apply via mobile, or do they have to get to a desktop? Depending on the type of candidates you are hiring, it's really important to be able to access mobilely, especially if you have more hourly workforce, or it is more kind of temporary type of roles. That is really key, because the number of people that actually have a home computer versus accessing everything completely via mobile has drastically changed over the last couple of years. Finally, to actually apply for a job. And if you have teenage kids or college-age kids or parents or somebody else, ask them to go through the process and ask them what it's actually like to apply for the job. Sometimes we forget. We forget how long it takes. We forget steps that we added into our process. I'm a big believer that every 18 to 24 months, we should be re-looking at our ATS and what this process looks like. Not necessarily re-looking at the vendor, but looking at how we have it set up. Do we have it set up in a way that really simplifies it and makes it easy for people to connect with us, or do we make it a challenge for them? Then once you're actually internally looking at the process, kind of go through, again, the audit. Where does it struggle? Where do you have problems? If you have an ATS or you have a talent management system, look at your reports. See what the metrics are. See what numbers don't quite seem right. And then overall, in order to build a business case or build some ROI, it is really key and really important then to find some research, attend things like this, find some actual statistics on why making a change is going to provide actual business value. I think it's one of the biggest challenges for a long time is we didn't have the analytics and we didn't have the metrics available to us to really explain why we needed to change things. And now we have a lot of that at our fingertips and a lot of that opportunity available to us. So when we do go to our leadership, we can, pick some of the smaller battles, get a few small wins, but we can show the business value and the business impact based on numbers, not just on kind of like, I think we should do this differently. We can actually prove and show why we should be doing things differently.
All right, great thorough response, Sarah. And we've got Zanglo with us again today. Zanglo's been on pretty frequently, so thank you for your attendance. We'll get to your question, Zanglo, and he wants to know, among executive recruiters, Russell Reynolds, Spencer and Stewart's, Korn Ferry, most are former business executives instead of having an HR background. What are your thoughts on this?
I think that is, one, it's obviously very accurate, but it goes back to the conversation we had on who recruiters are is changing. And the more strategic that the role is in the organization, the more important it is for them to have a good understanding of business for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons why the named firms do it the way they do it is because it gives a different level of credibility. If you have somebody that is just out of college, for instance, and doesn't really understand the business side of it, or doesn't really even understand what your widget is that you're selling does, and they're just looking at a resume, you're going to miss sometimes some really good candidates. And I have seen that happen. It's like, well, we're trying to hire a project manager, and this one says that they have a different title, so that clearly isn't a match because they don't always have the business experience to do that. On the flip side, corporate side of the world doesn't always have the luxury to hire executives or even really seasoned business people in a lot of these type of roles. We have budgets we have to maintain. I'm very realistic on this. And so we do typically hire and kind of grow within our organizations a little bit differently. One of the best things that I ever did in my career, and one of the best things that I have when I have done executive coaching and working with CHROs, is I have them put their recruiting team through almost like a day in the life of, or have them cross-train and actually go out and sit in the job that they're trying to recruit. It takes time, yes. It takes effort, absolutely. And it is not always easy to do. But when you actually can sit and shadow and really understand what it is that you are trying to recruit for and do at a much deeper level than what you could find on a job description, and when you help them truly understand business and make sure your recruiters understand that their role isn't just about filling seats and filling them fast, it's about filling seats in an efficient manner with the right people that are going to stay. And I think we need to make sure that we're training our recruiters to understand that that is their goal, as well as training them to understand the business side of how business works. Companies and recruiters and talent acquisition professionals that I know that are the most successful ones are the ones that have a lot of times stepped out of HR, stepped out of recruiting altogether, and spent some time in operations and business management, even if it was just for a 2-week rotation or something along those lines, to really get a good feel for what the business is at its core, not just the roles they're hiring.
I agree, Sarah. I think that getting that firsthand look at what you're actually looking for as a recruiter could be so important to get the best idea of the best fit to fit that role. So we'll move on to...
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Amanda, I'm going to come up with one that just happened to come up in a conversation a couple weeks ago with a friend. He is a software engineer, a programmer. That is definitely not my world to explain or to be able to recruit. Somebody called him, asked some really kind of generic questions. He was trying to explain, what it was he did, all these things. And the person that called had no idea what he was talking about, was asking him to spell very common terminology in the space. The perception that gave him of that company was that they were not forward-thinking in tech, and that they were probably not a company that he wanted to move to in his next step of his career. And so we have to also think about the impact. We talk about branding a lot, like it's the website, it's the career thing, it's all of these other stuff. Every point of contact with that candidate is part of the employment brand and what their perception is going to be about your organization.
Yeah, what a great example. I can't imagine, being in charge of filling a role when I don't know what those responsibilities might be. It seems like a shot in the dark, right, almost. So we will move on. Yeah. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So we'll keep going with some questions as they're coming in. Another regular that joins us quite often is Nini. And thank you, Nini, for being here again with us today. And she says, while talent acquisition professionals can come from sales and marketing lines, isn't it they should still have the HR skills to be more effective? So I guess this kind of piggybacks on Zanglo's question.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you. This is a great point. And it is why it is so important to have it. I think recruiting, in my mind, is one of the most challenging roles you can have, because I think you do have to have a really strong understanding not only of the business side of things, not only the roles that you're trying to recruit for, and be able to speak the language of your hiring managers and really build trust as a partner to them and make them feel like you understand. But you also have to understand from a legality perspective, the HR side of it. You are that main point of contact, and you are the face of that organization to that potential new hire. And so a lot of the HR early questions might even be coming through you during that interview process, and understanding where recruiting fits in talent management and how you have to partner with that role, that specialist. You have to understand what that person's role is, what their specialty is, just the same as somebody that is in learning needs to have a really solid understanding of how that recruiter and how the two of them can partner together. I'm a huge believer in, just, again, learning and development and as much cross-training and education as possible. And the more well-rounded you are, the better employee you're going to be just in general.
Yeah, it reminds me of it was a slogan for an educational program, I feel like back in the 80s or 90s, that it talked about the more you learn, It's reminding me of that. You're giving me some deja vu right now.
Yeah.
So we'll move to another.
I think it had the rainbow.
Yeah. You got it. So we'll move to another question. We've got Annalisa, and she wants to know about the change in recruiting. And are most talent acquisition employees expected to be SHRM certified?
I see that requirement far less in recruiting and for recruiters and in the recruiting industry than in other areas of HR. And I think that is traditionally because the content for certification definitely is far less focused on recruiting and far more focused on kind of core HR skills. While it's never a bad thing, I do know a number of recruiting professionals and talent acquisition professionals that are certified. It is something that I have not seen as often as a requirement in that type of a role versus some other different types of training and more recruiting industry specific type of credits.
All right, thanks for providing that,
I'll
Sarah.
leave it at that.
Yeah,
okay.
Sounds great. We'll get to another question this one comes from Melissa. Are there any key metrics which can show that the United Talent Management strategy is working?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the biggest ones to look at is quality of hire. And quality of hire is measured a little bit differently in different parts of the world. And so in some parts of the world, quality of hire is measured based off of the hiring manager satisfaction, kind of at that 6-month point. How well is this employee doing for you in the role that we hired him for? In other countries, it is looked at and measured based off of a cross between the new hire satisfaction as well as the hiring manager satisfaction, and also looking at retention rates. How well did they did? And it's still a relatively short measurement. The quality of hire has not really been clearly defined yet as a benchmark standard globally. And part of it is just because of the values and roles that happen in different industries. And I actually kind of like that it is different because different industries, different even areas of our country do need to measure this slightly differently for the best effect. I think for an organization, if you're looking at really measuring your unified talent management, I would be looking at a couple things. I would be looking at my retention rates. I would be looking at my internal mobility rates and how many people are coming into the organization and then able to move around in the organization, because that means we hired people that we're going to be able to develop and grow. I really like the idea of checking back in with that hiring manager at the 6-month point. Were we spot on? How happy are you with that? What should we have done differently if we were trying to rehire for the same role? Not that it's a knock on that employee, but it helps us as recruiting professionals make sure that the whole piece is looked at. Depending on how mature your learning and development side of the organization is, you can definitely connect with learning programs and how many people are moving into the programs based on what you found in early stages through your interview process. But quality of hire, I think, at its simplest, is probably the number one way to really kind of judge how all of this is working together. Employee engagement scores, retention rates being really close behind.
All right, great. Thanks, Sarah. And another hot phrase that we hear out here pretty often is having a seat at the table. And John tunes in with that phrase and wants to know, how do people in an HR role prove that we have business savvy necessary to have a seat at the table? And what are some KPI we can use to make our case?
Yeah, we've been hearing this phrase, seat at the table, for anybody that is on the call. I bet you've been hearing it since your first year out of, the first year in business, right? We've been hearing having a seat at the table for decades is what I keep being told. It's been talked about forever. I think at a lot of organizations, HR has a seat at the table now. We actually we're getting there. And we are in this role, and I know a lot of organizations are still struggling, and some HR professionals still are struggling. So the number one thing that I would say to you, if you are still trying to make sure that you're showing value and having some KPIs, is really to make sure that you are coming to the table with numbers, with metrics, with examples. If you look around the other seats at the table, and it's not a phrase I love, so I don't want to make it more common, but as you look around to the other people at the table, who do you have? You have marketing, you have sales, you have customer service, you have, your distribution, your manufacturing line, your widget making part, you have that. And then you have HR. And for a long time, HR came with yeah, I think everybody's happy. I think this is going on. We thought and we felt. And everyone else at the table came with hard, concrete numbers. They had things like Salesforce. They had a ERP solution. They had their call center metrics. They had all of the numbers where they could prove how many clients we're talking to, how many people are doing this. And for a long time, the HR technology just didn't provide concrete reporting in a way that enabled HR leaders to walk into that room and say, here's our impact. Here's how many people that we have talked to. Here's how many people. And it's not just about how many people are hired. Here's how many people have gone through learning. Here's how many people are certified now so that we're not going to face lawsuits. Here's how many people that we are talking to for these roles. And oh yeah, that succession plan, we have 5 people deep for every single one of them. We can come now with more data and more information today than we ever could have even dreamed of just 10 years ago. The amount and accessibility, if you have a talent management suite and talent acquisition combined with talent management, even more so, but if you have that talent management suite, the amount of data that you are able to bring, and if you have kind of the added solutions that are really the predictive analytics side of it, it's amazing how much you can do. If you're opening a new office in Shanghai, you can go into your systems now and say, they're having a conversation and you've got sales saying I think so-and-so, and I think we can do this, and everybody's trying to figure it out. We can then come in from HR's perspective and say, hey, here's the 16 people that have expressed interest that said they would move there. 14 of them already speak the language. 3 of them would be ready to move within the next 30 days. Here's all of them combined with their performance results that are all better than what we were asking for. So the amount of data that we can bring to the table, I think, is key. And then going back to the earlier conversation, is there's a lot of research through sites like Person and Human Capital, and there's a lot of information out there that are showing these links between HR and engagement and customer satisfaction and business profitability. I think the profitability stat, if you have high employee engagement, your revenues are 2.5x. It's a huge bottom line business number. But we just have to be better at tying our people to our profits in a lot of organizations. Right. Sorry to go on my tangent there.
No, it was a great tangent. It was a very informative tangent, so thank you. Well, we are at the bottom of our hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap up everything for today. I'd like to give one more thank you to everyone at Cornerstone OnDemand for making today's webcast possible, as well as one more thank you to Sarah for being our presenter. And to all of our HCI members, thank you for being here with us today. Don't forget to take a look at those upcoming HCI events by clicking the Attend a Conference link at the top of the page. And we'll see you guys for the next HCI learning opportunity soon.